Hey everybody, this is Aubrey Chaves from Faith Matters. For today's episode, we brought back Charles Inouye. When we first spoke with Charles a couple of months ago, he mentioned that he had prepared some thoughts on living a life free of racism, and given President Nelson's recent call to lead out in abandoning attitudes and actions of prejudice, we got him back on as soon as we could to share his insights. We knew that Charles would have a unique perspective to share on this topic as the son of Japanese parents who were held in the Heart Mountain, Wyoming internment camp during World War II, and having grown up as part of the only Japanese family in the small town of Sigurd, Utah. Charles spent much of his youth working on his family's farm in Sigurd, but eventually served a mission in Japan and then went on to earn degrees from some of the world's most prestigious universities, including a BA from Stanford and a PhD from Harvard. He's now a professor of Japanese literature and visual culture at Tufts University. And with that, we'll jump right into the episode. We hope that you enjoyed this conversation as much as we did.
Well, Charles Inouye, thank you so much for coming back to the podcast. We appreciate you being here.
No problem.
Just to give our listeners a little sense of how this came to be, after our last conversation, which will have aired several weeks before this one, we had much more to talk about. And you mentioned specifically that you had even prepared some thoughts on a very important subject that we felt like deserved to be its own episode. So here we are to do that. And I'll let you really describe what it is that you had planned. But to give just a little bit of context and preview, we're going to be talking about racism and, more importantly, anti-racism with you, and allow you to share some of your perspectives. I think that this is a really appropriate time to have that conversation. This last year and a half, really, and even accelerating to some extent throughout those last 18 months, has been a time of reckoning in our country for anti-Black racism, and more recently there have been further conversations around anti-Asian racism, right. And President Nelson in his conference talk just a year ago asked us as a church membership to lead out in abandoning attitudes and actions of prejudice. And so I think this is a really important conversation, and one that we as a church membership, but also as members of the human race, have a responsibility to address in a really thoughtful and serious way. And so we think obviously, Charles, you're a perfect voice for this, and so we're excited to have you. We're excited to have you back to talk about this.
Oh, thank you. I enjoyed our last conversation.
Good. And I'll just the format here, I think we'll just let you sort of like dive into some of the thoughts that you had prepared, and we'll pepper you with questions throughout, and maybe there's follow-up discussion at the end. But let's just dive in.
Okay, great. So what I've prepared is a very sketchy outline for how we might live a non-racist life. And first of all, if we think about racism, what it is, I'd like to just put out a functional definition of racism as a system. It's a system of values that exclude, and the way it excludes is by way of very clearly defined categories that sometimes are positive and sometimes are negative. So you could say these people are very good and these people are very bad, but by way of these categories, a system is formed, and we live within that system. And because we live within this system, I think that maybe the first thing we have to do is to embrace our racism. By that I mean not to understand it in a personal way, but to understand it as a system of values that we live within. So I'm assuming that your mind, which has been trained to clearly define, come up with categories of positive and negative values, that your mind has been trained by your social context. And whether we like it or not, that context has given us racist views of things. So we live in a context that happens to be racist because we live downstream from the modern period. And I think the modern period is over. People would, argue with me about that, maybe, but over or not, we still live with these ideas that were used during the modern period to create massiveness. So one thing you can say about modern society is it's massive, So people march off to war, not, a dozen at a time, but at thousands at a time. Or they go to baseball games, Red Sox game, 30,000 people in the same place. So the massiveness of society is created by ideas and concepts like race, like nationality, like religious affiliation, and so on. And because of those ideas, and because they're still around, we still have racist practices. I think we're getting more wary of those racist practices. They become more transparent lately, as you say.
Can I ask you one thing about this point? Because
Yeah.
I think that anytime there's an event or something that causes a lot of conversation around racism, something that I always see is people sort of defending their own personal beliefs as non-racist. They feel like they don't have any like personal emotions that are prejudiced, and so they feel like they want to excuse themselves from like being complicit in this situation. And so could you talk about how that can be problematic? I like this language of like you're living within the system. So that that makes it clear that to me, I think that you could have good feelings toward any race and still be part of this system.
So I might I'm wearing this shirt. I don't know who made this shirt. I don't know where it was made, but chances are it was made by people who are not anywhere in my sort of immediate realm. And chances are that they are working under very difficult circumstances. So by me buying this shirt, I'm a part of that system. Even though I might be very sympathetic to their plot, I'm still sympathetic. I'm still implicated by the way things are. If I walk into most buildings here in Boston that are older than, a couple hundred years old, they've all been built by slave labor, for example. The university that I work at. So even though I may have these attitudes that I think are scrubbed clean of racism, just by virtue of being on this earth, I probably am racist and part of the system, as it were. We can't extract ourselves so easily from that system. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's.
And I wonder, could you bring in the sort of Buddhist ideas that we talked about in the last episode here too, where if we do, like we talk a lot about wanting to break down walls between sort of like the self and others and realize our interconnectedness, and that can be a good thing that makes us more loving, but also if you do that, there's sort of this like necessary implication too, that you're part of systems that you don't necessarily want to be a part of, but like due to our interconnectedness, we are, even if it's not through our own choice.
I think that's right. I think that whether we see it or not, we are connected, but we can try to disconnect ourselves from people by way of various kinds of categories. And so what I want to do today basically is talk about excluding categories and including or inclusive categories. And I want to start by pointing to the Book of Mormon, actually, in 2 Nephi chapter 2, verse 11, where we read this passage that goes like this: "For it must needs be that there is an opposition in all things. If not so, my firstborn in the wilderness, righteousness could not be brought to pass, neither wickedness, neither holiness, nor misery, nor good, neither good nor bad. Wherefore, all things must needs be and this is an important idiom right here, compound in one." Everything is a compound in one. Wherefore, if it should be one body that is not differentiated. It must needs remain dead. I mean, without categories, without these oppositions, then existence has neither life nor death, corruption nor incorruption, no happiness, no misery, neither sense nor insensibility. In other words, nothing happens without this state of categories that are in opposition to each other. So what I like to do is use the Taoist framework. You know, before we talked about Buddhism, but I think the Taoists are very good when it comes to talking about the relationship between these extreme categories and what the resolution of those categories might be. And so I have this handy dandy
Wow.
visual aid that I actually made for a Sacco meeting talk the other day, right?
Oh, wow.
So
And for our listeners, if you don't mind describing, for those that are audio only, if you could just describe what it is.
Okay, all right. So we're looking at the Taoist symbol of two swirls. One is black with a little white dot, and one is white with a black dot. And the idea is that black is in opposition to white. You know, they're excluding categories. But even so, there's a little bit of white in the black and a little bit of black in the white, which shows that even these categories are not perfectly pure, right? And Second Nephi 2 is saying that without these oppositions, you know, nothing happens. We wouldn't have what the Taoists call Taiji, or the beginning of the movement of these values. But the thing is, and these values are extreme. That's Ji means extreme. This is a Chinese character of the top pole of a roof, right? Mm-hmm. So this is the extreme. But if you look at this diagram, there's one spot on it that is without extreme, right? Wu Ji, without extreme, and that's right there, that red dot right in the middle.
That it sort of, and for those again listening, the red dot sort of crosses that it sits right in the middle of the boundary between separating black and white.
Right. Yeah. So even though this might be swirling around like this, right? Male and female, black and white, blonde and free, or so forth. There's actually one spot here where you are all of those things all at once. You're kind of in touch with, you know, male and female, black and white, and so on, right? So to put it, you know, simply, the object of the game is, this is you, this yellow one right here, right? Mm-hmm. The object of the game, you're either here, or you're here, or you're here, or maybe you're here, right? But the object of the game is to migrate toward this spot, right? Because if you can get to there, then you've got to the point where there are no extremes, there are no categories. It's kind of like the Buddhist concept of nothingness, where you're in touch with everybody, everything, and so on, and you're without racism.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
totally.
so
and just for our listeners again, there was that red dot that encompassed sort of both sides, right in the middle. There was a yellow dot that was portable, that, you know, could move around to different sections of this diagram. And when Charles was saying the goal is to migrate, he's moving that yellow dot right over the red dot that sits in the middle.
So you could be over here and be male, for example. Mm-hmm. But the object of the game is to move toward the female. And, you know, you can jump over here, but this is kind of an errant version of the migration, because here you have a female identity, but you're still not, you know, in touch with both at the same time. So the only place where you can be in touch with your male and your female side is right there, right?
Yeah.
Now you're you're digging ditches and cooking spaghetti
Yeah.
at the same time.
Yeah. Richard Rohr, the great Christian and Catholic theologian, has a similar concept rooting in Christianity that he calls the intersection of opposites. And the type that he uses is the cross, that Christ was crucified on, with its vertical and horizontal beams, and Christ right there in the center.
Oh, yeah.
Representing sort of both sides of any given identity or issue.
Right. So I'm kind of using this Taoist framework. It's not exactly Taoism, but it can help us understand what we have to do in order to rid ourselves of these racist categories, right? How do you move from here to here, essentially, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this category, this says, people from the moon are bad. This one says people from the moon are good.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're trying to move to this position where we can understand both of those. Basically, we're trying to understand people from the moon, but whether good or bad, right? So in order to do that, I came up with a couple exercises, and I'm going to put you two through these exercises.
Okay.
We're ready.
Are you ready?
Yes.
All right. So step number 1 is called the 4-step exercise.
Okay.
And this is kind of like a stretching exercise that you would do before you played basketball or something. And it prepares you to understand the tension inherent in the idiom from 2nd Nephi, to compound in one, right? What is compound in one? In other words, what is the relationship of exclusive categories to inclusive categories? So you give a category of people, you give them, you characterize them, then you modify that characterization by the statement, not all are like this, and then you come up with a broader category. So I'm going to give you a group of people, and I want you to work yourself through this exercise, right?
Okay.
So the category is Democrats.
Okay. So Democrats are bad.
Okay,
Democrats are bad.
Democrats are bad.
3.
And then Democrats are not all bad.
Okay, and 4.
And then Democrats are people, citizens.
People, citizens, whatever, right?
Yeah.
Whatever their category that's included.
Mm-hmm. That includes Democrats. Yeah.
Right. So as we move from the specific to the general, inclusive to the exclusive to inclusive, we've accomplished a few things already. We see how narrow the exclusive category is, and we see that it's included in this larger category that has a positive value, right? So
yeah,
I mean, I'm assuming that you think of people in a positive way.
Yeah. Right.
Which may not be true.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But we're inclined to do that because we think of ourselves as people.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm a people and you're a people, then we're all people. And so it's harder for me now to be biased against you.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a simple thing, right?
So
it really is, but that's very powerful. I mean, I'm just like running through other categories in my mind that feel a little bit more charged, and it really is a powerful and such a quick mind exercise.
Yeah. So you just start with a category, you characterize the category, you qualify the category, and then you come up with a general category that balances that.
Yeah.
In exclusive category.
now,
So already you kind of you're feeling a little bit looser now because you know this would be a good exercise for children because it would teach them the difference between statements about people that are exclusive and statements that are inclusive.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
It makes me think of what you mentioned in the last podcast about how important it is to join groups of people who are different from you, because it feels like the big leap between step 2 and step 3 is knowing anyone who doesn't fit your your big generalization. You know, if you know one exception, then you can make that leap.
Yeah.
And you know, modify that second statement a little bit.
Yeah, so that's a great point. I mean, it underscores the importance of experience, right? You know, I've noticed that the hardest thing for my students to really master when it comes to writing is prepositions. And that's because prepositions show the relationship between things. You know, I go to school. You have to understand something about something about going, something about school and the process. And until you get that, you don't know that you're supposed to use to, right? You say, I swam over the ocean. You'd say, that doesn't make sense because you swim in the water. But if you didn't experience water, you would never know that.
Yeah.
So the reason prepositions are hard is because they establish the relationship between things, which is, I think, how meaning is established, you know, relationship of things. And it's how we learn to live in the world too, but it takes some experience.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move away from this highfalutin abstract talk and get to something more concrete. Okay, so step 2 is the racism-free diet. Go to the grocery store and buy something that you don't recognize. You know, something that you see that, you say, what is that, right? Or how would you cook that? So if you went and got it, whether it's a durian or miso or plantains or, you know, mozzarella cheese, whatever, and it's not in your normal sphere of things to buy and eat, and you bought that and learned how to eat it, you would learn a lot, I think, about how to understand another group of people.
I love that idea for kids too. It seems kind of like it would be unconscious. Like you're just really opening them up to the idea that difference is a good thing and not something to fear.
Right, absolutely. So
or avoid.
Corollary to this, and I briefly mentioned it last time, and your husband laughed nervously.
I do that a lot.
Oh no, are you going to talk about macaroni and cheese again?
You shouldn't let your kids eat the same thing all the time. You know, I know kids who only eat white things, you know, like bread, pasta. But I think that down the line, that does them a disservice because they fall into this very narrow comfort zone. So they don't get the exercise, the experience of leaving that comfort zone or widening their comfort zone a little bit.
Right.
Does that make sense? I mean, it's a simple thing, but if you just eat different things, you know, your kids will grow up very differently, I think.
Yeah.
Right.
I love how accessible this is too. Obviously, travel to foreign places can sometimes be prohibitively expensive or time consuming or whatever, but this sort of brings, you know, this brings that to you a little bit in a really affordable and accessible way.
Yeah.
And just like would create this habit from such an early age, like this idea that like this is good, like it's good to feel a little uncomfortable and nervous, and that's the same as excited, and like it can start feeling like a good thing to try something new, you know, really early.
Right.
Even if you know, we have little kids too who I think would prefer to eat all white things, but I do feel like even just if they're seeing it on the dinner table and they're seeing that the other older kids are excited about trying something new, I'm hopeful that will be contagious eventually, and they'll have good feelings around new experiences.
A lot of times our resistance to new things is conceptual, based on absolutely no experience. Like I never dreamed, you know, my parents would eat sashimi on special occasions. They'd go up Salt Lake and there was this one store where they could buy it. But I never ate it until I was about maybe 17 years old.
Wow.
And then one day I just tried it, and to my surprise, it was really good. I thought, oh, what have I been missing all this time, right?
Yeah.
But that kind of stuff happens all the time, right? All right, step 3. Speaking of travel, step 3 is my get up and go step. And it is simply the need to go to different places, which we like to do. But to be careful about how we go, right? Because a lot of times another place is kind of set up to make us feel at home. You know, leave the light on, kind of, the advertisement for the hotel that feels like home, or even the sense of self that we have. We used to define ourselves by where we lived, but when we started leaving where we lived, we had to have another way of doing that. And so we came up with this notion called the self, which is a kind of mobile sense of home. You take it with you and it doesn't change. But the reason the modern people did that was because they started to explore and conquer the world, and they needed some way to maintain their sanity and feel like they weren't going to get lost and so forth. The problem with a lot of travel is that tourism is like colonialism. You go there to sort of reaffirm your superior position in society. So when people came to this part of the world, they renamed it. They called it New England and New Hampshire. They built the houses that they were familiar with. They ate the food that they were familiar with. So they pretty much ignored everything about New England that didn't fit their categories, right? And it just propagates this mentality that is very narrow. So yeah, travel, but travel with the eyes of a student rather than with the eyes of a colonist.
I love this. Yeah. Yeah.
All right, step 3. Is that 3? Step 4, I guess. I'm losing my count.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, use new words. And this doesn't have to be learning a foreign language. Have you ever met someone who speaks differently from you? Has different ways of saying things?
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting how different people will say the same thing in a different way. But if you just copied them, it would rearrange your brain cells. You know what I mean? I wish I had a good example, but it's obvious in foreign languages where we call a different thing by a different name and so forth. And I want to make the point that when I was a kid, my parents didn't want me to learn Japanese, right? They on the one hand, they wanted me to retain my Japanese heritage, but they didn't want me to learn Japanese, the language, because they basically had been imprisoned because they spoke a foreign language, right? It wasn't a great payoff for them. So I guess I can't blame them for discouraging that, but I have to say that only when I started learning a foreign language and got good at it, and only after I went to Japan for the first time, did I really, feel comfortable being American.
Wow. Yeah.
My talk was not like, yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say I have a similar story in my family. My grandpa was an immigrant from Puerto Rico and spoke only Spanish in his home growing up. And then when he went to school, they lived in Philadelphia. And when he went to school, he really didn't speak any English and would try to communicate in Spanish. And when he did that, his teachers would hit him in response and say that he had to speak English, and that was sort of their way of literally beating it out of him. And so for that reason, he never wanted his kids, which is my father's generation, to learn Spanish. And so it is kind of a sad thing that that language barrier, I think has kept us, to some extent, my family, culturally, from embracing that Hispanic side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This also made me think of just how useful it is, I think, to be reading, reading all the time, all different types of books, and poetry too. I really notice when I'm immersed in a book, I can, like, my thoughts change. I start thinking in the way that this author writes, and I haven't ever thought about what an expansive exercise that is. But I mean, it's like a very long conversation to read a good book.
Right. And the point you make is great. Poetry is the ability to articulate your experience differently. and it leads to new and fresh experience, and it breaks down our racist attitudes towards people. Okay, step 5, join an inclusive group. So what happens when we grow older is that we tend to associate more and more with people who are like us. You know, we decide that we're, you know, politically conservative or politically liberal or whatever. We we go to college, we join unions, we take a job, you know, we become a lawyer or whatever. And what happens to most of us is that our range of experience actually gets narrower, narrower and narrower, right? So one thing you can do to combat this tendency is to join groups that are inclusive in nature. So on one hand, you know, going to a liberal arts college is a kind of a snooty thing to do, and could be narrowing in that sense. But if that college is, you know, anything like the one that I work at, Tufts here, it's designed to be full of diversity and is supposed to expose you to many different people and many different ways of thinking. And so on the one hand, it's a exclusive group that's inclusive, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the church is actually the same thing, right? On the one hand, it's exclusive in the fact, in the sense that we you know, we get baptized to join it and so forth, but the nature of the group itself is not of natural unity. It's one of achieved unity. Zion is not where everybody is the same, right? I think having one mind and one heart is a little bit different from everybody looking the same.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And so when we think of the gathering, the restoration, right? It's a gathering of all people, but we're told that everybody, interestingly, everybody is going to be taught in their own language. You know, that's an interesting point. You know, why? I've thought about that a lot. You know, why is that such a big deal? And then it's a big deal because Zion, the process of gathering to Zion is not indoctrination. Missionary work is not indoctrination. It's a gathering. It's a restoration of our full experience as people.
That's a great point. I'm thinking too about this. You know, I stay home with our 4 kids right now, and I feel like I want to join inclusive groups, and I agree. Like the ward really is a great place for that, but where university experience right now is not an option, and I love the idea of that, but it feels like it's hard to do anything but like be the mom right now. But I have found glimpses of this that have really been edifying just within our like small community with our kids, like things like the library story time, and they have like all different themed groups that attract a whole different population that have felt to me like this inclusive experience that you're talking about. And we've often we take our kids to other churches just around our neighborhood, and I also kind of feel that too, like it's a different kind of inclusivity that that felt a little bit more uncomfortable and was a little bit more stretching, but in a way was also really unifying with a community that felt a little broader than just our neighborhood ward.
Yeah.
So I think there are little ways to do this that don't have to be, you know, a university or something where you have to move, you know.
So, you know, you can ask yourself the question, well, are Latter-day Saints alike? And I think in some ways, yeah, I mean, we are alike. You know, we believe in Jesus, we believe in the atonement, but we're very unlike each other in many ways too, right? We are working on different things, and so it's good to remember that that's even exclusive things that seem to be exclusive are actually quite inclusive. So you wouldn't be a great Latter-day Saint and be racist, I think, for that very reason, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay,
great
so
point.
moving right along, step 6, learn lots of things. This was an easy one. So I keep telling my pre-major advisees that they're here not to prepare for a career, but to prepare for a life. You know, it's easy to have a career, but it's harder to have a life. Yeah. So I asked them this question. So 10 years from now, and this is a great question for you because I can see your front door right there. So 10 years from now, you walk into your front door, right? Who's there? And it just stops these guys cold, right? Like, oh. Because they'll say, if you say, well, what are you going to be in 10 years? Say, I'm going to be a computer scientist, or I'm going to be a chemist, or whatever, right? But when you say 10 years from now, when you walk through your front door, who's there? And there's this total blank. They don't know. They have no idea, absolutely no idea, right? I mean, at BYU, probably it's different, right?
Yeah.
Walk through the door, there, your kids, there's your husband. The back is on the floor and whatever. But a lot of young people have no idea because they're preparing for a job, but they're not preparing for a life. So I think if you taught yourself to learn lots of different things, you're making yourself not only not prejudice, but you're making it possible for you to have a much fuller lifestyle. So learning lots of things. And finally, step 7, I guess, is develop a sense of humor. You know, in the temple when they say to avoid loud laughter.
Loud laughter.
Have you ever wondered about that? I should scratch my head. What does that mean, loud laughter?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think this is maybe one way to think about it. Maybe loud laughter is bad because humor can be a distancing thing, right? It can't put distance between you and something or somebody. You know, a racist joke, for example, or a sexist joke puts distance between you and the other people. But there's a kind of humor that actually moves you toward other people, and that's we should call it quiet laughter. Laughter that is I think irony and ambiguity based. So one of the reasons things are funny is because you understand something at 2 different levels at the same time. Right? So for example, one of my favorite jokes, the guy comes into the psychiatrist's office and he says, "Doctor, I think I'm a dog." And the doctor looks at him and says, "Okay. And when did this begin?" The guy thinks for a while and says, "When I was a puppy." Isn't that a great joke?
That's pretty good.
So yeah, I think ambiguity, that embracing of the porousness of our categories, being able to understand something from a different perspective in an ironic way. I think there are all ways that help us to move past racism.
Yeah.
Wow, what an interesting point. And humor is that same skill, that kind of like humor that brings you closer to someone instead of pushing you away. That's the same, it feels like the exact same skill. That's so interesting.
Yeah, I love that.
Wow.
So to sum up, so we're all about the game plan is to migrate from here to here, right? But nothing happens if we don't have these opposites. But we need these extreme categories. But ultimately, it's the resolution of these opposites that we seek. So we experience opposition in all things. And that's not a recipe for conflict, as we often think, but it's actually the mechanism by which we move toward a central place of understanding. Opposition in all things is a good way to describe anything worth working for that's kind of hard, like a non-racist society, a strong family, a loving marriage, and so on. So we move slowly to here. I mean, we're not moving from here to here. We're moving toward this spot, which makes us all alike. But being all alike is the way to actually be extremely appreciative of diversity. So if I can quote from the Tao Te Ching, section 28, hold your male side with your female side. Hold your bright side with your dull side. Hold your high side with your low side. Then you will be able to hold the whole world. When the opposing forces unite within, there comes a power abundant in its giving and unerring in its effect. Flowing through everything, it returns one to the first breath. So that's what the Taoists call Wuji, no extreme. It's sort of the beginning and the end. It's where you start and where you go back to. Guiding everything, it returns one to no limits, Wuji. Embracing everything, it returns one to the uncarved block. When the block is divided, it becomes something useful, and leaders can rule with the pieces. But the sage holds the block complete, holding all things within himself. He preserves the great unity which cannot be ruled or divided.
Oh.
Isn't that beautiful?
I love that.
Yeah.
It's really remarkable how similar what you just read is to the verse in Second
Nephi.
Nephi.
Yeah.
Where wherefore all things must needs be a compound in one. It's just it's a different language. It seems like as I've sort of progressed through my life, something that has started to signal for me a great truth is something that is found in every great faith tradition or wisdom tradition. If you find it multiple places, then there must really be something there. And so that's really resonating with me.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Have you written about this anywhere else? Like if people are interested in looking into this more.
This is it right here.
This is a book.
Yeah, we can start pre-sales on your book right now.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like you said, it's so concrete. And last year we talked to Joanna Brooks and we were talking about racism pretty soon after the George Floyd murder. And something Joanna Brooks said was she challenged all of the listeners to spend the next year and spend the next year reading about white supremacy and how to be anti-racist. And so this has been kind of just something that we've been reading about constantly all year long. And so I feel like we've like finally arrived at like base camp, like all that reading, and it just feels like, okay, now I at least like I think I get the problem, and I think it took that long to understand the system we were in, and so now it feels like we can actually start. And this just feels like a really great way to say, okay, like year one complete, and now here's some direction, here's some really like concrete things that we can work on with our family. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
I just really love this.
It's an arbitrary list of things. I mean, you can come up with your own list, right? It's whatever makes you more aware, more open, more inclusive, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. But such a great place to start. Thank you again, Charles. Any final thoughts from your end?
No more thoughts.
Okay.
Well,
thank
great
you.
to see you again.
Yeah, at this rate, I'm sure we'll have you back in a month or so for
I enjoy you too. You're very you're a good yin and yang.
Well, next time we see you, we'll work on like the middle. That red dot.
All right, Charles. Thank you again.
All right. Thanks so much.
See you around. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for listening. We really hope that you enjoyed this conversation with Charles Inouye. And as always, if Faith Matters content is resonating with you and you get the chance, we would love for you to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or whatever platform you listen on. We read every review and it really helps us to get the word out about Faith Matters, and we appreciate the support. Thanks so much for listening. Remember, you can check out more at faithmatters.org.